The early life, Mashhad, Iran, 1939 to 1950s. On April 19, 1939, in the historic city of Mashhad, a young boy named Ali Khamenei was born into a deeply religious family. Mashhad, the spiritual heart of Iran's Shia community, had long been a center of pilgrimage, learning, and religious scholarship. Ali's father, Javad Khamenei, was a respected cleric, known for his devotion to Islamic teachings, and his mother, Khadija Murtamadi, came from a similarly pious family. From the very beginning, Ali was surrounded by the rhythms of prayer, study, and the disciplined routines of religious life. Growing up in a household where the Quran was recited daily and religious discussions were part of the air, young Ali developed a keen sense of spiritual curiosity. His early education began at home, where his father personally instructed him in the fundamentals of Islamic law, ethics, and the Persian literary tradition. By the time he was old enough to attend formal schooling, it was evident that Ali had an aptitude for learning, a quiet intensity, and an analytical mind that could grasp complex theological ideas with ease. As a child, Ali witnessed a country on the cusp of change. The Pahlavi dynasty, under Shah Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, was consolidating power, modernizing cities, and promoting Western-style education and governance. Yet, despite the outward appearance of prosperity, deep currents of political tension and social inequality ran through the nation. The clergy and religious communities, including Ali's family, were wary of these changes, concerned that traditional Islamic values and social norms were being undermined. By his early teens, Ali Khamenei had already begun attending Mashhad seminaries, where he studied under prominent religious scholars. These seminary experiences were rigorous and disciplined. The study of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, philosophy, logic, and Arabic grammar demanded not only intellectual engagement but also personal discipline. Ali's teachers noted his sharp memory, his ability to debate effectively, and his steadfast dedication to the demands of religious scholarship. During this period, Ali also formed connections with students and clerics who would later play significant roles in the Iranian Revolution. His early exposure to political discussions within the seminary and among the ulama instilled in him a keen awareness of the tension between religion and the secularizing reforms of the Shah. While other children of his age were focused solely on studies or recreational pursuits, Ali's mind was absorbing the complexities of governance, authority, and the moral responsibilities of leadership. Outside the classroom, life in Mashhad exposed Ali to the broader society's struggles. Pilgrims from across Iran and beyond arrived in the city, bringing with them stories of political discontent, social inequality, and religious marginalization. These experiences shaped Ali's understanding of the practical realities of governance and the grievances of ordinary people. He began to see that leadership, especially one rooted in religious values, required not only scholarship but also courage, moral integrity, and the ability to navigate complex social and political landscapes. By the late 1950s, Ali Khamenei had moved to the religious center of Qom, the heart of Shia scholarship in Iran. There, he studied under some of the most prominent clerics of his generation, immersing himself in theology, jurisprudence, and philosophy. Qom was a hub of political and intellectual ferment. The students and scholars debated the role of Islam in modern governance, the legitimacy of Western influence, and the responsibilities of the clergy in society. In this environment, Khomeini's intellectual foundations were solidified, his political consciousness sharpened, and his commitment to religious and social leadership took firm root. It was in Qom that young Ali encountered the ideas of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was beginning to emerge as a vocal critic of the Shah's secularization and modernization policies. Khomeini was drawn to Khomeini's vision of an Islamic state guided by religious principles and social justice. This early ideological alignment would later define his political trajectory, setting the stage for a life that would place him at the center of Iran's religious, political, and military power structures. By the end of the 1950s, Ali Khamenei was no longer just a promising seminary student. He was a young man with a clear vision, a network of like-minded peers, and a growing reputation for scholarship and political insight. The foundations of what would become a life of extraordinary influence and controversy had already been laid. Ali Khamenei, the boy from Mashhad, was beginning to emerge as a figure destined to shape the future of Iran for decades to come. The rise of a political cleric, early activism and the Shah's Iran, 1960s to 1970s. As the 1960s unfolded, Iran was a nation of contradictions. Cities like Tehran and Mashhad were undergoing rapid modernization under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who aimed to transform the country into a Western-style monarchy. Modern schools, roads, and industries were expanding, yet beneath the surface, discontent brewed. Many Iranians felt alienated from the Shah's vision, especially among the clergy and devout communities who feared the erosion of traditional Islamic values. It was in this environment that Ali Khamenei began to assert himself not only as a religious scholar but also as a political actor. By the early 1960s, Khomeini had returned to Mashhad and then to Qom, continuing his studies while simultaneously observing the social and political tensions around him. The Shah's White Revolution, a series of reforms including land redistribution, women's suffrage, and secular education, was viewed by many clerics as a direct challenge to Islamic authority. Khomeini, already deeply invested in the preservation of religious values, began to participate in gatherings and discussions that questioned the legitimacy of the Shah's reforms. These early years of activism were risky. The Shah's regime maintained a strict security apparatus, monitoring clerics, students, and dissidents. Yet Khomeini's reputation as a devout scholar and careful thinker allowed him to navigate these dangers. He delivered sermons, wrote religious commentary, and engaged in discreet political discussions that critiqued the government's secular policies. Khomeini was not merely reacting to events, he was cultivating a vision of governance grounded in Shia Islamic principles, a vision that aligned closely with Ayatollah Khomeini's emerging ideology. By the mid-1970s, Khomeini had become increasingly prominent in the circles of politically active clerics. He developed networks with like-minded religious scholars, students, and activists across Iran. His ability to analyze complex political situations and propose principled responses earned him respect among peers and a cautious acknowledgement from the government, which could not ignore his growing influence. Khomeini's political thought was rooted in a belief that Islam should guide both personal morality and the structures of governance. Unlike many activists, he combined theological rigor with practical political strategy, a combination that would later define his leadership style. During these years, Khomeini faced repeated arrests and surveillance by Savak, the Shah's notorious intelligence agency. These experiences hardened his resolve. time in prison exposed him to other political prisoners, dissidents, and reform-minded clerics, further expanding his understanding of Iran's political landscape. Yet, despite the pressures, Khomeini's public persona remained disciplined. He avoided reckless confrontation, carefully calibrating his criticism to maintain influence without provoking premature retaliation from the regime. The late 1970s marked a turning point. Iran's economic challenges, popular dissatisfaction, and the Shah's increasingly authoritarian measures ignited widespread protests. Khomeini, now a seasoned activist and respected cleric, emerged as a critical voice in the movement that sought to replace the monarchy with an Islamic Republic. He coordinated with Ayatollah Khamenei, who had been exiled to Najaf, and helped mobilize student networks and local religious communities to resist the regime. Khomeini's organizational skills, strategic thinking, and moral authority positioned him as one of the rising leaders of the revolution. By 1979, the revolution reached its climax. The Shah fled Iran, and Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile to a nation teetering between chaos and hope. Khomeini was now recognized not merely as a scholar but as a key figure in the Islamic Republic's emerging leadership. His decades of study, careful activism, and dedication to religious and social principles had prepared him for the next phase, guiding a nation in the aftermath of a revolution that would transform every aspect of Iranian life. It was in this crucible of political upheaval and social transformation that Ali Khamenei's future role as one of the most powerful figures in Iran began to solidify. The networks he had built, the experience he had gained through struggle and imprisonment, and the strategic acumen he demonstrated during the revolution made him an indispensable part of the new Islamic Republic. Yet, as the country celebrated its newfound independence from monarchy, Khomeini understood that building a lasting religious government would require patience, vigilance, and an unprecedented consolidation of power. Presidency and the Iran-Iraq War, from statesman to supreme leader, 1981 to 1989. In the early 1980s, Iran was a nation scarred by revolution and plunged into conflict. The monarchy had been overthrown, but the country faced internal instability, economic disruption, and the immediate threat of war. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran in September 1980, triggering a conflict that would last 8 brutal years. Amidst this chaos, Ali Khamenei emerged not only as a religious authority but also as a key political actor entrusted with the nation's leadership. In 1981, Khomeini was elected president of Iran, a position that would test both his political skill and his strategic vision. The presidency, while subordinate to the supreme leader Ayatollah Khomeini, offered him a platform to navigate the complexities of post-revolution governance. Khomeini faced the enormous task of stabilizing the country, managing the war effort against Iraq, and maintaining the revolutionary ideals that had galvanized millions. The Iran-Iraq War was not merely a military conflict, it was a crucible that defined the Iranian state and society. Cities were bombarded, economic resources were stretched to the breaking point, and the human cost was staggering. As president, Khomeini was deeply involved in coordinating both military strategy and domestic policy. He worked closely with the Revolutionary Guards, the backbone of Iran's defense, ensuring that the war effort aligned with the ideological principles of the Islamic Republic. Khomeini's presidency was marked by a blend of pragmatism and ideological commitment. While firmly rooted in Shia Islamic principles, he recognized the necessity of practical governance. He supervised reconstruction efforts in war-affected areas, oversaw rationing and economic planning, and coordinated with regional and international actors where possible. Despite the immense pressures, he maintained a disciplined public persona, demonstrating resilience and calm leadership in a time of national crisis. Internally, the revolutionary government faced significant challenges. Political factions vied for influence, economic crises tested public patience, and the need for unity in the face of external aggression was critical. Khomeini navigated these competing pressures with careful calculation, ensuring that the revolutionary government remained cohesive while gradually consolidating his own influence. His ability to balance ideological rigor with practical administration earned him respect among allies and wary acknowledgement from rivals. The death of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989 marked a pivotal turning point. The Assembly of Experts, tasked with selecting the next supreme leader, recognized Khomeini's combination of religious credibility, political experience, and leadership acumen. At just 50 years old, he was appointed the second supreme leader of Iran, assuming a role that would place him at the apex of both spiritual and temporal power in the country. As supreme leader, Khomeini's authority extended far beyond the presidency he had once held. He became the ultimate commander-in-chief of Iran's armed forces, including the Revolutionary Guards, and wielded the power to veto public policy decisions and select candidates for high office. While not a dictator in the traditional sense, his office was one of immense influence, placing him at the center of a complex web of competing power centers. Young Iranians would grow up knowing no other leader at the helm of their country. Khomeini's rise to the supreme leadership solidified a model of governance in which religious authority and political power were inseparable. State media chronicled his every public move, his image became ubiquitous on billboards and in shops, and his voice was amplified in Friday prayers and national addresses. Abroad, presidents and prime ministers often occupied the headlines, but within Iran, Khomeini's hand guided the levers of power with quiet but firm determination. By the end of the 1980s, Ali Khamenei had transformed from a seminary student and revolutionary activist into the most powerful figure in Iran. His presidency had tested his abilities, the war had forged his resilience, and the mantle of supreme leader had positioned him to shape the country's future for decades to come. His leadership would define a generation, steering Iran through both internal challenges and the turbulent waters of regional and global politics. Consolidation of power, supreme leadership and shaping Iran, 1989 to 2000s. With the death of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989, Ali Khamenei assumed Iran's highest office at a moment of national uncertainty. He inherited a country scarred by 8 years of war with Iraq, with an economy in ruins, and with competing factions within the revolutionary elite vying for influence. The task before him was immense: stabilize the nation, consolidate the revolution's achievements, and guide Iran into a post-war era while preserving the ideological foundations of the Islamic Republic. Khomeini approached his new role with a mix of strategic patience, ideological commitment, and administrative control. While he did not seek to rule as a dictator in the traditional sense, he ensured that the office of the supreme leader became the ultimate authority in all aspects of governance. He controlled the military, particularly the Revolutionary Guards, who had become an essential pillar of national defense and internal security. He also held significant sway over the judiciary, the media, and the mechanisms of political vetting, including the approval of candidates for presidential and parliamentary elections. Domestically, Khomeini focused on consolidating revolutionary gains while managing the pressures of modernization and reform. The 1990s saw a rising debate between conservative and reformist elements in Iranian politics. Reformists advocated for political liberalization, greater freedom of expression, and more engagement with the international community. Conservatives, closely aligned with Khomeini's vision, prioritized religious values, social order, and resistance to Western influence. Khomeini's role was pivotal. He balanced these forces, allowing a degree of political pluralism while ensuring that the Islamic Republic's foundational principles were never compromised. One of his signature approaches was the careful cultivation of generational loyalty. Young Iranians, many of whom had grown up entirely under his leadership, were educated and socialized in a system in which Khomeini's authority was central. His image was everywhere on billboards, in schools, and across state media. Friday prayers, speeches, and national events consistently reinforced his presence. For ordinary citizens, life in Iran was inseparable from the guidance and oversight of the supreme leader. On the international stage, Khomeini's influence extended to Iran's foreign policy and strategic posture. He supervised the country's relationships with neighboring states, including Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria, while asserting Iran's position in the broader Middle East. He maintained a cautious but firm approach toward engagement with the United States and Europe, especially regarding Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional influence. Under his leadership, the Revolutionary Guards became not only a military force but also an instrument of geopolitical strategy, capable of projecting power beyond Iran's borders. Khomeini's leadership style combined ideological consistency with pragmatic governance. He was known for his ability to navigate complex networks of competing power centers, leveraging loyalty, alliances, and institutional authority to maintain stability. His ability to veto public policies, select political candidates, and shape the state's ideological narrative made him the central figure in Iranian politics. Unlike many authoritarian rulers who relied solely on coercion, Khomeini integrated moral authority, religious legitimacy, and institutional control to maintain influence. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Khomeini faced multiple challenges from reformist presidents advocating for change to external pressures such as sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Yet he managed to maintain a careful equilibrium. Abroad, Iranian presidents often occupied headlines and public attention, but the reality within the country was clear: the strings of power were firmly in the hands of the supreme leader. His leadership was a constant, a stabilizing force amid internal dissent and external threats. By the turn of the century, Ali Khamenei had firmly established his role as the ultimate authority in Iran. His vision of governance rooted in Shia Islamic principles, reinforced by revolutionary ideals, and executed with institutional control had shaped every aspect of Iranian political, social, and military life. The foundations he laid during this period would guide the nation's trajectory for decades to come, ensuring that the supreme leader remained the axis around which Iran's state, society, and military revolved. Iran in the new millennium: nuclear ambitions, internal dissent, and global spotlight, 2000s to 2010s. As Iran entered the 21st century, the country faced an increasingly complex geopolitical environment. Globally, tensions between the West and the Middle East were escalating, and Iran's position in the region drew intense scrutiny. Domestically, a younger generation of Iranians educated, connected, and aware of the world beyond their borders began voicing demands for reform, freedom of expression, and economic opportunity. Through it all, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's office remained the fulcrum of authority, shaping the nation's responses to both internal pressures and international challenges. One of the most critical issues during this period was Iran's nuclear program. While civilian nuclear energy was justified for development purposes, Western nations, particularly the United States and Israel, expressed growing concern over potential weapons development. Khomeini, as supreme leader, exercised direct control over all aspects of the program, balancing technological ambitions with strategic deterrence. His leadership ensured that Iran pursued nuclear capabilities cautiously, signaling both strength and resolve to regional adversaries, while carefully managing international scrutiny. At the same time, Iran's internal politics were marked by tension between reformist and conservative factions. Reformist presidents, including Mohammad Khatami, pushed for social liberalization, freedom of the press, and greater political participation. Khomeini, maintaining the centrality of the supreme leader's authority, allowed limited reforms but retained the ability to veto policies and manage dissenting voices. His influence over the Guardian Council, judiciary, and military ensured that the ideological integrity of the Islamic Republic remained intact, even as society experienced subtle changes. Social media and technology began to reshape Iranian society. Young people, often more connected to global culture than previous generations, used these tools to organize, share ideas, and protest. Events such as the Green Movement of 2009 tested Khomeini's leadership. Nationwide protests erupted following disputed presidential elections, highlighting the population's growing demand for transparency and democratic engagement. While Khomeini publicly called for order and unity, he relied on the Revolutionary Guards and security apparatus to suppress unrest, demonstrating the balance between ideological principles and pragmatic governance. Khomeini's influence extended well beyond domestic politics. His guidance shaped Iran's involvement in regional conflicts, particularly in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. He provided strategic direction to allied groups, including Hezbollah, and oversaw Iran's support for regional proxies. Through careful orchestration, Khomeini projected power across the Middle East, asserting Iran's role as a key regional actor. His decisions often drew international criticism but also reinforced the perception of Iran as a sovereign state unwilling to yield to external pressure. State media under Khomeini continued to cultivate his public image as a steadfast leader. Billboards, television coverage, and public ceremonies emphasized his moral authority and leadership. Young Iranians, for whom Khomeini had always been the central figure of authority, rarely experienced life in Iran without his presence shaping every dimension of political and social life. Abroad, successive Iranian presidents garnered headlines, but within the country, Khomeini remained the ultimate decision-maker, pulling the strings of power in a manner unseen by the public eye. During this period, Khomeini also maintained ideological consistency, advocating for Islamic principles in governance while navigating the challenges of modernization, globalization, and technological change. He reinforced the notion that Iran's sovereignty, culture, and religious identity were intertwined and non-negotiable. His speeches and writings emphasized resilience, independence, and vigilance, shaping both public perception and policy direction. By the late 2010s, Ali Khamenei had become synonymous with Iranian authority. His decisions influenced diplomacy, defense, social order, and economic policy. For much of the world, Iran's actions were often associated with elected officials or visible politicians, but inside the country, the reality was clear: Khomeini's hand guided Iran's trajectory with precision and authority. His leadership, combining religious legitimacy with strategic governance, had become deeply institutionalized, ensuring that his influence would remain a central feature of Iranian politics for decades. The later years, consolidation, authority, and strategic control, 2010s to 2020s. As the 2010s progressed, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's position as Iran's supreme leader grew increasingly central, both domestically and internationally. Having guided the country through decades of revolution, war, sanctions, and political upheaval, he had become the embodiment of continuity and authority in a nation defined by change. For young Iranians, many of whom had never known a country without him, Khomeini was not merely a political figure, he was the axis around which the Islamic Republic revolved. During this period, Iran faced mounting economic challenges, fueled in part by international sanctions, fluctuating oil prices, and internal structural inefficiencies. Khomeini's office exerted direct influence over economic policy, often issuing guidance to balance ideological principles with pragmatic necessity. While presidents and ministers proposed plans, the supreme leader maintained oversight, ensuring that economic measures aligned with the state's overarching objectives. His control extended to the Revolutionary Guards, which had evolved into both a military and economic powerhouse within Iran, deeply involved in national infrastructure, industry, and security operations. Khomeini's international strategy remained steadfast. He continued to oversee Iran's regional policy, guiding involvement in conflicts in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, and providing support to allied movements. His approach emphasized resistance to Western influence while maintaining strategic flexibility to advance Iran's interests. Negotiations over Iran's nuclear program, including the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPO, were heavily influenced by his decisions. While Iran engaged diplomatically, Khomeini maintained the ultimate authority over any agreement, signaling both restraint and determination on the international stage. Domestically, Khomeini faced persistent challenges from reformists and a younger, increasingly connected population. Social media, internet access, and global cultural exposure amplified demands for personal freedoms and political reforms. Yet, Khomeini's influence over the judiciary, security apparatus, and political vetting processes allowed him to maintain a firm grip on governance. His office acted as a stabilizing force, ensuring that dissent did not undermine the ideological foundations of the Islamic Republic, while simultaneously allowing limited expressions of political debate within controlled boundaries. Throughout these years, Khomeini cultivated a carefully curated public image. His speeches, televised addresses, and ceremonial appearances reinforced his authority. Billboards, media coverage, and national celebrations continuously reminded Iranians of his centrality to the state. Young citizens grew up with Khomeini's figure omnipresent, an enduring symbol of continuity, guidance, and power. Abroad, headlines often focused on elected officials or regional events, but within Iran, the reality was clear. Khomeini's hand remained the decisive force shaping policy, society, and military affairs. In the global arena, Khomeini's statements carried weight far beyond Iran's borders. He articulated positions on conflicts, international sanctions, and diplomatic negotiations with a mixture of ideological clarity and pragmatic strategy. His ability to coordinate intelligence, military planning, and foreign policy decisions gave Iran a unique ability to influence regional dynamics, often challenging the strategic calculations of powerful nations such as the United States and Israel. By the mid-2020s, after decades of leadership, Khomeini had become not only a historical figure but a symbol of an entire era of Iranian politics. His authority was absolute in practice, though exercised with a combination of ideological, religious, and strategic acumen. The institutions he strengthened, the Revolutionary Guards, the judiciary, state media, and political oversight mechanisms ensured that his influence would continue to shape Iran even as the country faced new social, political, and economic pressures. In this period, reports began circulating of tensions between Iran and Western powers. Some accounts highlighted Iran's resilience under Khomeini's guidance, while others predicted possible escalations in response to sanctions or regional conflicts. State media continued to reinforce Khomeini's image as the central figure in Iranian governance, a leader whose decisions impacted not just Iran but the wider Middle East. As the decade progressed, Khomeini's long tenure became historically significant. Few leaders in modern history had maintained such enduring authority, combining religious legitimacy, political control, and military oversight. Yet, despite the stability he provided, the Iranian state and society remained in a delicate balance, constantly navigating internal demands for reform and external pressures from powerful global actors. Khomeini's later years were thus defined by an intricate mix of authority, strategic planning, and the unyielding assertion of Iran's independence on both domestic and international stages. The final years, enduring authority and the reported events, 2020s to 2026. As the 2020s unfolded, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei continued to occupy the center of Iranian power, a figure whose authority shaped every aspect of the nation. His office oversaw political appointments, military strategy, economic policy, and social directives, ensuring that the ideological foundations of the Islamic Republic remained unchallenged. Young Iranians, having grown up entirely under his guidance, understood little of life in Iran without the supreme leader's omnipresent influence. Throughout these years, Khomeini faced a series of challenges that tested both his strategic and ideological acumen. Internationally, Iran remained under heavy sanctions, facing diplomatic isolation in the West while asserting influence across the Middle East. The Revolutionary Guards, under his supervision, continued to expand their military and economic reach, playing pivotal roles in regional conflicts and shaping Iran's responses to threats. Domestically, demands for reform persisted, amplified by a new generation accustomed to global communication and social media, but Khomeini maintained control through a combination of institutional authority and ideological messaging. State media continued to project an image of continuity and strength. Billboards, television coverage, and public ceremonies emphasized Khomeini's moral authority and leadership. His speeches underscored independence, resistance to foreign pressure, and adherence to Islamic principles. Abroad, international headlines often highlighted Iran's president's nuclear negotiations or regional military developments. Within the country, however, Khomeini's hand guided every decision, pulling the strings behind the visible actors of government. According to reports from international media outlets, including BBC and other sources, Khomeini's final days were marked by extraordinary events. On the first day of massive US and Israeli airstrikes on Iran, it was reported that Khomeini was killed. US President Donald Trump reportedly announced this development, and Iranian state television later confirmed the death of the 86-year-old leader. These reports described Khomeini as one of the longest-serving leaders in the world, whose tenure had spanned decades and defined the political, social, and military contours of modern Iran. As reported, his office had been the apex of power, head of state, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and overseer of the elite Revolutionary Guards. Analysts noted that while Khomeini was not exactly a dictator, he had placed himself at the center of a complex web of competing power centers, with the ability to veto public policy and influence candidates for public office. Young Iranians, for whom his leadership had been a constant, reportedly faced a sudden and disorienting transition, with decades of stability and centralized authority abruptly called into question. State television, long dedicated to covering Khomeini's every movement, reportedly documented the period leading up to his death, emphasizing his image in public spaces and the ubiquity of his presence in daily Iranian life. Abroad, successive presidents had often occupied headlines, but within Iran, it was Khomeini who had historically pulled the strings. The reported nature of his death, in such violent circumstances, signaled a new and uncertain era for the country and the wider region, with questions arising about succession, domestic stability, and the future of Iran's international strategy. The implications of these events, as described in reports, extended far beyond the immediate loss of leadership. Analysts speculated that the Revolutionary Guards would play a critical role in maintaining order, that the assembly of experts would act swiftly to select a new supreme leader, and that regional and global powers would closely monitor the unfolding situation. Khomeini's decades-long influence ensured that his legacy, both ideological and institutional, would continue to shape Iran's political landscape long after his reported death. This final chapter, as reported in international outlets, underscored the paradox of Khomeini's life, a leader whose presence had been both pervasive and complex, whose authority had been both ideological and practical, and whose death, reported under extraordinary circumstances, marked a moment of profound uncertainty for a nation he had guided for more than 3 decades. Legacy and the uncertain future, Iran after Khomeini. The reported death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei marked not only the end of a life but the close of an era. For nearly 4 decades, he had been the axis of Iranian politics, society, and military strategy, a figure whose authority was unparalleled in modern Iranian history. Born in Mashhad in 1939, rising through the seminaries of Qom and Najaf, and navigating the turbulent waters of revolution, war, and state building, Khomeini's life had been inextricably intertwined with the story of Iran itself. Under his leadership, the Islamic Republic had developed into a nation guided by both religious principles and strategic pragmatism. Khomeini's control over the Revolutionary Guards, the judiciary, and political appointments ensured a continuity of governance that survived internal dissent, economic crises, and external pressures. State media, public ceremonies, and the symbolic omnipresence of his image had reinforced his centrality to Iranian life. Young generations of Iranians, as reports emphasized, had grown up never knowing a country without him at the helm. The reports of his death, following massive US and Israeli airstrikes, highlighted the fragility of political structures built around a single figure, no matter how powerful. Analysts and commentators, while cautious, suggested that the loss of Khomeini's guiding hand would create immediate uncertainty. Questions arose about the Assembly of Experts' ability to select a successor swiftly, the role of the Revolutionary Guards in maintaining order, and how both domestic factions and foreign powers would respond to the vacuum of authority. Despite these uncertainties, Khomeini's legacy was firmly embedded in Iran's institutions. The ideological framework he reinforced, the networks of power he cultivated, and the organizational structures he strengthened ensured that the Islamic Republic would not collapse overnight. His life had demonstrated the combination of religious authority, political skill, and strategic foresight that allowed him to navigate decades of crises, wars, and challenges while maintaining control over a deeply complex state apparatus. International observers noted that Iran's future, in the immediate aftermath, would likely be defined by a cautious recalibration. While the reported circumstances of his death, airstrikes and sudden violence, would undoubtedly provoke heightened security measures, regional recalculations, and global scrutiny, Khomeini's decades of institutional consolidation suggested that Iran's governance system was resilient enough to endure transitional uncertainty. For historians and analysts, the narrative of Ali Khamenei was already one of monumental significance. From a seminary student in Mashhad to a revolutionary activist, from a president navigating the Iran-Iraq war to the supreme leader whose influence shaped every facet of Iranian life, Khomeini's trajectory had been extraordinary. The reports of his final moments added a dramatic, if tragic, coda to a story defined by persistence, strategic mastery, and unyielding authority. As Iran faced an uncertain future, the world reflected on the extraordinary reach of a leader whose life had spanned wars, revolutions, and geopolitical transformations. The reported violent end, while shocking, underscored the reality that even the most entrenched authority is subject to the unpredictable forces of politics, conflict, and global dynamics. Khomeini's legacy, however, was unlikely to fade quickly. It was embedded in the institutions, military structures, and ideological framework that he had meticulously constructed. In the end, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's life story, from the streets and seminaries of Mashhad to the apex of Iran's religious and political hierarchy, remained a testament to the power of conviction, strategic vision, and resilience. His reported death, occurring amid unprecedented international conflict, signaled a turning point, a moment of transition, reflection, and perhaps transformation for a nation that had known no other guiding presence for over 3 decades. Whether Iran would navigate this transition smoothly, or whether instability would redefine the region, remained an open question, one that would shape the course of history in the years to come.